Today I'm looking at the Osprey Exos 58 rucksack. Is it any good? Who are you going to ask? Somebody who's walked over 1,000 miles with one? That'll be me then. It's just a rucksack, right? I've been using this sack for 2 or 3 years now. I've done the Cape Wrath Trail, done the Skye Trail, the Heriot Way, the northern half of Offa's Dyke, as well as countless 2 or 3 night trips in Dartmoor and South Wales and the like. So I've got to know this rucksack pretty well by now. But after giving it so much use for so long, figured it was a good chance to share with you what I think about it, what's good about it, what's not so good. So if you think of getting one of these, you can make a well-informed choice. Now this video is not going to be a run through of all the features and functions of the rucksack. You can see that elsewhere. But what it is going to be is kind of a warts and all run through of what it's like to use day to day in the hills. So this is the 2018 version of the Osprey Exos with the orange and grey colour scheme. This comes in 2 or 3 sizes of capacity, and I went for the 58 litre version, which is the largest one. You can make up your own choice, but I knew that I was going to be using this in winter conditions for backpacking for several days in a row, so I needed a bit of capacity. And this weighs about 1.2 kilos empty. You can get lighter packs for sure, but they tend to be a bit more on the pricey side. So for the price I paid for this, to have a rucksack that this light was excellent news. And it does make a big difference, you know, when you're trying to get the pack weight down to make sure you're not carrying around a huge load, then saving a kilo or so on the pack is a great way to start. So this lid pocket at the top, people call it a brain for some reason, so it's detachable, so you can remove it and just use the little storm flap that's underneath it instead, and that's really handy. I use it a lot. I use it to keep my waterproofs in, things like that I'm going to need to hand quite readily without burying down inside the pack to get at them. But I don't use it all the time, and when I walk in the summer, when I've got less to carry, I ditch it and leave it at home. So detachable brain, very useful. The next thing I really like about it is the stretchy side pockets. So on each side we've got these stretchy pockets, and there's one on this side which are identical, and there's one on the back of the pack as well. Personally, this stretchy pocket on this side I use for my water bottle. That might be a Catadin or perhaps an Nalgene full of water that I can easily get to on the go without needing to stop and take a glug of water. I prefer doing it that way to using a hydration bladder in the pack personally. On the other side, well, that's where I keep my, shall we say, toilet bag, and also I tend to put trash in this pocket as well. The other thing that I really like about this stretch pocket wise is on the back of the rucksack. So there's this very big mesh pocket here, which is extremely big capacity, and I can use that for lots of things. Usually what I do is I keep like a sit mat of some kind there. So when I ever stop for a bit of a break, it's very easy to get to. The other things that I use that big pocket for are if my tent, particularly the outer, has got very wet overnight and I don't want to pack it in the main pack, I want it to be on the outside, then it goes into that big pocket extremely well. And that means that if I stop on the trail, if the weather clears, I can quickly get it out and dry out the outer without too much fuss. So that works very well. Now I mentioned capacity earlier on. It has these zigzag straps on the side which you can cinch up or release according to your needs. And so I find usually that in the summer, if I'm perhaps carrying less gear, I'll ditch the brain, I'll get rid of that, and I will cinch up these zigzag cords on the side to reduce the capacity of the rucksack quite nicely. And that works extremely effective. Now let's talk hip belt pockets. This particular version doesn't have hip belt pockets, and that didn't go down too well when it was released. So hip belt pockets can be really handy for chocolate bars, compass, tubes of sweets, gloves, anything that you need readily to hand when you're on the trail. I personally have found that using a chest pod works better for me, and you'll see this in lots of my videos. A chest pod, I can see more easily what's there, and it also has a bigger capacity. Personally, for a bit like me with a bit of a tummy or a big cagoule on or something like that, it's not always easy to see down at hip level to see what's inside the hip pockets. And because of the nature of the curve of the hip belt, the capacity of a hip belt pocket is always reduced because of literally the shape of the hip belt. Whereas a chest pod is a bit more of a rectangular bin that you can fit a lot more inside. So I can fit hats, gloves, compass, chocolate bars, sweets, all kinds of stuff in a chest pod because it's a bit bigger. But that's a personal taste thing. So if you like hip belt pockets, then the newer versions of the Exos do have, and this one in particular doesn't. But what all Exos rucksacks have is this loop coupled with this loop, and that's a place to store your walking poles when you're not using them on the trail. It's pretty easy to do when you're walking without stopping. So I tend to just tuck the tips of the walking poles into that bottom loop and then cinch the top one around the top, put it tight, and it's a piece of cake. And when you're walking along, it's not in the way at all, it doesn't get in your way at all, but they're there, very easy to get to when you need them. So this I use a lot. If you're on a trail where there's quite a bit of road walking and then off on the moorland and then back on a track, so you don't need the trekking poles all the time, this works really, really well. So top feature, and I like it a lot. Okay, so how waterproof is this pack? Well, to be quite honest, I can't really tell you because of two things. Firstly, I always use a rucksack liner because I don't want to take any chances, and if the weather's particularly bad, then I am sometimes known to put a rucksack cover on as well to sort of belt and braces. But the pack is essentially reasonably weatherproof, but don't rely on it. Now when it comes to rucksack covers, people's opinions are divided. They're a bit of a nuisance because they cover the rucksack, and getting in and out of the rucksack when there's a rucksack cover on is a complete pain. When I did the Cape Wrath Trail, I chose to use one, and I chose to make it a bright orange one, and that was because I was walking the trail solo, and if I had any kind of problem, fall, episode or whatever, I wanted to be easy to spot in the middle of a desolate Scottish moorland. Day to day in the UK, if I'm going to stomp off to Dartmoor now, I won't use a rucksack cover. I find they get in the way, a bit annoying. What I do instead is I have the rucksack liner. So what I tend to do is inside the rucksack I have this thin rucksack liner. Some people use rubble sacks. This is an Isle of Flume sack liner, which is a bit taller than the average rubble sack. And then everything inside is in its own waterproof stuff sack as well. I take no chances. Now when you're using the pack, it's important to note that it is not a tubular shape. A lot of rucksacks, I don't know for ease of construction or whatever, tend to be like a cylinder. But if you look at the Exos from behind, you'll see that it's sort of slightly flared out as it goes towards the bottom over the hips. So it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top. I like that because what it means is that there's plenty of room at the bottom for my sleeping bag, spare clothing, etc., which I tend to keep down there. But it also means that the center of gravity of the pack is relatively low because you've got more space down low over your hips. So when you're over rough ground, it means that because the center of gravity is low, you're not getting tipped over so much as the rucksack sways from side to side. So I like the fact that it's not a cylinder, it's slightly flared out at bottom. Well, I think that's a big plus. Now, having said it isn't a tube, but it is just a very basic shape inside. It's only got one opening around the top. There is no side zips to get access to the bottom or anything like that at all. So that has pros and cons. It means essentially that there are fewer weak spots on the rucksack. There's fewer points that can leak. But what it does mean is that you have to be a little bit thoughtful about the order in which you pack things. So when I'm on the trail, I tend to make sure that bags of snacks or whatever are at the top, and also my tent, because then when I get to the end of the day's walk, the first thing I want to get is the tent, especially if the weather's bad. That needs to be right at the top so I can get out and get some shelter set up. Right, so let's talk now about just what it's like to carry loads in this thing, because that's basically what it's for, isn't it? So what I really like about this pack is that when I've got it on, perhaps because I've been using it a lot, but when I've got it on, I really don't notice that I'm carrying anything. It's what I call an unconscious carry, because the weight sits comfortably on my hips. It fits the shape of my body nicely, so I don't really notice any particular weight or burden or soreness at any point. To be honest, there are times when I find myself the shoulders getting a bit tired or my hips getting a bit tired or something like that, and that's usually to do with some movement in the straps or the adjustment. We'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, this is a very comfortable pack to carry large loads in. I'm usually carrying up to perhaps 13, 14 kilograms if I've got some water in the pack at the start of a day's walk with lots of food and stuff, and that's no problem at all. Okay, so I've taken the pack off now because I want to show you another thing that I really like, and that's this mesh panel in the back. So the way that the rucksack's constructed, you have a thin, like a 5mm metal hoop that goes up around the back, and the back of the rucksack is a slightly sort of concave shape, and then suspended about 3 or 4 centimeters in front of that is this mesh, I'm going to call it a trampoline, and that's what sits against your back. So you get a very, very good airflow between the trampoline and the back of the rucksack, and then between your clothes and the trampoline as well, because of that big mesh. All of which means that even in hot weather, I don't get a very sweaty back at all. I particularly like that. And that's one reason why I went for this pack. It's a very personal thing, but you can get some beautifully made sacks that are body hugging, but as a slightly unfit middle-aged English bloke, I do get a bit sweaty if I'm slogging my way up a mountain, and the idea of having a very clammy, sweaty rucksack on my back doesn't really appeal. Right, so I've gone through quite a lot of things now that I like about the pack, haven't I? And they call it, I think it's post-purchase rationalisation, where once you've spent a bit of money on something, you really don't want to admit you've made the wrong call, and you do a lot of things to subconsciously justify your decision. So just to prove that that's not the case here, I want to talk about some of the things that aren't so good about the Osprey Exos. So when I'm travelling, I'm often bushwhacking through trees and over fences and stiles and things. So I like to keep everything inside the pack as much as I can. I don't really like to have stuff attached on the outside where it can get bashed and damaged or wet or flap around in the wind, that kind of thing. So I like to have everything inside. But the Exos has got a multitude of attachment points, 1, 2, 3, on each side, and then also on the brain as well. There are some loops where you can clip stuff and strap it as well. Now, personally for me, they're completely useless. Likewise on the bottom, it comes with straps that can loop around underneath, and sometimes people will use that to sling a tent underneath or something like that. Again, I don't really like to do that because there's a huge risk of it falling out without being noticed, and it's damaged if you sit down on a rock or you going over a barbed wire fence, something like that. It could easily get caught. So I don't like to have lots of attachment points on the outside. I don't really see the point. If you've got a big enough rucksack, why not stick it inside? The other thing that struck me when I got this pack is that the hip belts have very little padding indeed on them. So you need to be mindful of that when you're putting the rucksack on. And whilst we're at it, there are a few other things that you need to be aware of when you're thinking of buying one of these packs. They seem to be prone, and not just this model of Osprey sack, to squeaking when they're carrying particularly heavy loads, which can drive you crazy when you're on the trail. And usually I can eliminate it by just working on these top tension straps or adjusting the balance between the shoulder straps and hip belts, something like that, just to adjust where the tension is falling, and that actually usually cures it and it goes away in time. The other thing that does drive me slightly crazy when I'm on the trail is that the adjustment on these shoulder straps, they don't lock very effectively, and they creep loose over the course of a day's trail, particularly if you're on rough ground. So it's a fairly small tensioner here, and I find that the strap webbing can creep through it. So I quite like modifying things. If you see my tent videos, you'll know that. So what I've done on this rucksack is to put markings down the strap every couple of centimeters. So when I'm on the trail, if it feels like it's a bit lopsided of a carry perhaps, then I can go down and look at the strap markings and see whether they're equal both sides without needing to take it off and judge it. So that makes it easy to measure. And I would say most days I end up just having to cinch it up by a few centimeters where it's worked loose. The same with the hip belt. It does just to creep loose over time. I like to think it's because I'm losing weight on the trail. Possibly not. So you need to keep just cinching it up as you go through the day. Now there's another little bugbear which would be quite easy to fix, and what is it? These are straps that hold the lids tight. If you're not using the brain, there's a second sort of storm flap, if you like, over the top that you can use instead, and it clips into them in the same way. But the clip on the storm flap is an identical size, colour and shape to the clip on the brain. And many is the time where I've been happily walking along and haven't realised that instead of clipping into the brain, I've clipped into the storm flap as well, and this brain's been flapping around totally out of control. So I guess it just needs a different colour clip or something like that on the brain just to make it easy to identify. Sort it out, Osprey. The durability of the pack has been fantastic actually, it's done really well. So after 1,000 miles, what have we got? Well, this is a bit muddy here, but you can see that this point around the sort of wing of the hip, it's gone through where the frame is. It doesn't have any serious effect on the usability of the rucksack, but that's where it's starting to go through. But also, I don't know if you can see well, this mesh panel at the bottom wore through and exposed some gaping holes. Now I sent it off to Osprey. They have a very good sort of lifetime guarantee repair service. It was very fast as well, I have to say, and free, which was fantastic. That's the good news. I don't want to sound ungrateful, Osprey, but I think you could have done a slightly neater job. Here it's almost like they just had an off cut that they could use. They didn't bother to carry it right across from seam to seam, which seems a bit of a shame to me, but it still works fine. And I appreciated the fast and free service they gave me. But if you've got one of these packs, then this is going to be an area where it wears, simply because that's the main sort of contact point for the load of the rucksack. So the brain has a nice bright clip for things like car keys and stuff like that, as well as the handy little pocket for bits and pieces. But if you're not using the brain on a rucksack, there isn't an equivalent inside the main pack. So what I've ended up doing is using a loop that would otherwise be used for supporting a hydration pack, and I've got a couple of little carabiners on there for things like car keys and anything I don't want to lose. And then I use the hydration sleeve for maps, guides, passports, money, that kind of thing that I want to keep nice and secure and safe. Right, so having gone through all that, what are my tips if you're thinking of buying one of these rucksacks? First thing, choose your size carefully. Remember that if you go slightly larger on the capacity, you can always cinch it down if you need to, so it gives you a bit more versatility. Second thing, plan your packing. It's only got one access point at the top, so you pretty soon learn to know which order to pack things in. Put the stuff you're going to need first on the top, and the usual rules apply. Try and have the heavier stuff packed closer to your back. I'd strongly suggest making some kind of markings down the shoulder straps, so that when you're on the trail, if the straps start to slip a bit, you can rapidly even them up and get them straight. That's worked very well for me. But apart from that, the only modification that I've made is to put little bungees to hold this strap, the loose end of this strap in place. And I've done similar ones for the shoulder strap as well, just to stop them flapping around so much in the wind. Don't assume it's waterproof. Use a rucksack liner, use stuffed sacks to make sure everything's nice and secure and dry. Hopefully that way you won't have to need a pack cover, because I find them a bit of a nuisance and make it difficult to get at things inside the pack in a hurry. And finally, this rucksack is not barbed wire proof. So I've got a patch here on this side where I rubbed up against a barbed wire fence on the Isle of Skye. To repair that, I used some tenacious tape patches, one on the inside, one on the outside, and that worked absolutely fine. If you go through all the things I like about it and the things I don't like, any small bugbears with this pack are massively outweighed by all the good things about it. Bottom line is, it's a very light and comfortable way to carry a pack, especially on long trails, even over rough ground. It really, really works well. Would I buy another one again? Well, after slogging away over 1,000 miles of trails across Britain, I have to say, yes, I would. I hope you appreciate me putting all that work for you. So I hope you found that useful if you're thinking of buying one of these rucksacks. There's lots of other videos on my channel of me using the pack in different adventures, and so check them out.